inspired. I think that her passing almost makes her more of a martyr than she already was. I think it lights a fire under a lot of people's butts, for lack of better words. But I think it is a huge loss for our nation. I think it is a huge loss for women. And I hope that everybody like myself who have learned about her and been inspired by her can leave a similar legacy and make similar things happen for the people who come after us. And I think the implications of her replacement kind of go along with that. Being such a feminist trailblazer and champion for civil rights and women's rights, not only are there implications in a democratic sense on whether or not it's ethical to replace such an important and imperative position before the people have a say, but it's also there's implications in the sense of what the belief system of whoever replaces her is. And if the things that RBG was a champion on, like civil rights, like women's rights, and just being that inspiration would continue. And so I think that it's such a big deal because it's doubly implicated. It's not just democratically implicated and constitutionally implicated and implicated with voting, it is also implicated legacy-wise. So I do think that that is a conversation that needs to continue to be had. And I do think that it will be difficult to come to a consensus on whether or not she should be replaced before or after November 3rd.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's move now to Alexis Alvarado. She is a fourth-year student studying political science with a minor in global studies and has been a part of various campus organizations, including potential candidates of Lambda Theta Alpha Latin Sorority Incorporated and Rockathon. She's also been a peer mentor for a number of campus programs, and she currently works in TRIO as a peer mentor and at Sky Zone Toledo. Alexis, I'll bring the same question to you, but just to restate, so how do you feel about the passing of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and what are the implications for her replacement?
Hello, everyone. Dr. Broxmeyer. I definitely agree with Lexa. The passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg definitely, I know, has inspired a lot of people, even just through scrolling social media and things like that. I'm seeing more people who maybe would have never said anything before, like going to vote and, doing your civil duty in the community and things like that. More people are doing that now because they've been inspired by the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I don't think anyone is ready for a new Supreme Court justice just yet, because the more people that I'm seeing like posting these things and things like that, it's sounding like a lot of people aren't as ready as maybe our administration thinks that everybody is. And along with what Lexa said about all of the implications, it is very important, especially this year's election, on waiting until November 3rd to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I think it's important that the people are going to have a say in that decision and are going to have a say in who is the next person on the Supreme Court, just because of everything that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was able to do while she was in the Supreme Court. I think we need to have someone just as dynamic and just as passionate about social justice and women's rights and civil rights and all of those things. I think it will take a while to find someone that passionate, and I think waiting until November 3rd.
Thank you. I think Amir had mentioned that Precious Tate couldn't make it, so we'll go to the next person on the panel, which is David Person Jr. He's 25 years old and currently lives in Toledo, where he was born and raised, and is a field organizer with the Michigan Democratic Party. His background lies between community engagement, voter education, politics, and electoral campaign work. His passion has always been public service because of his passionate concern to rendered service to the people. And his favorite quote is, "Everybody can be great because anybody can serve," which is from Dr. King. David, would you like to
Yeah.
speak?
Thank you, Mr. Broxmeyer. And First and foremost, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity, for allowing me to be a part of this panel today. Um, in terms of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I would say that, as everyone else was saying, she was very influential. She was a feminist. She was very iconic as a Supreme Court justice. And she was such a trailblazer, and she's inspired me and many people within my community to just to seek change. I think that's really important. She was also someone who I also looked up to as well, considering that I might want to pursue a career in public service. Also, as far as the implications of replacing her, she I I think that they should definitely honor not replacing her until this election is over. Um, just because I believe that was her wishes as well. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see who that replacement might be. I know that there's been some, recent talks of replacing her, but I'm just hoping that they would just honor her wishes until after the election.
Thank you. And now we have Kira Valentine. She's currently a junior at the University of Toledo, majoring in political science with a pre-law concentration. And she's working with the Campus Vote Project. Kira, would you like to speak to the question?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for the introduction and thank you all for having me. I'm excited to be here. I think I agree with everything everyone said. I think that even if you don't follow politics, the impact that RBG has had on our country, what she's put her foot in as far as women's rights and LGBTQ plus rights and all of that. I think as far as her replacement, I feel as though historically Supreme Court justices aren't they aren't quick with the process or as quick as the process to do this, because before, or as far as like the election process, I think if she was replaced before then, usually the process does not happen that quickly. So I think the fact that they're trying to rush into it doesn't necessarily, it's not morally right to do that. I also think that, I think Alexis said it, usually when, I think we all want to see that her replacement has similar views as her, because we're so used to having that strong voice in the Supreme Court. And for her to be replaced by someone who might not have that, it could be something that we don't really want to see. But as everyone else said, we just have to wait and see what everyone else has to say. So.
Thank you. That's great. Oh, did you have something that you wanted to add to that? Oh, okay. I think what we'll do now is move into the second question, and it makes sense to kind of change it up a little bit in the direction of the panel, just so that we can distribute the timing of the responses. So, Kira, would you like to start with, since you answered last in this first round, the second round, would you like to begin by telling us why is voting important for you personally and your community?
Okay, so personally, this is my first presidential election that I'm voting in. So I've always been excited to vote, so I'm excited to actually do it this year. And also with the Campus Vote Project, is promoting everyone to vote. I think that particularly in our community, a lot of people don't usually want to vote. I think that they think that their vote doesn't necessarily matter. They're confused on the processes. So I think it's important to educate everyone on that. I also think that it's important to understand that our votes do make a difference. I think it's a common misconception that our individual votes don't change the outcome of an election, usually because of the electoral colleges, but that's not always the case. And I think that it's important to note the fact that your vote does matter. And also, I think that personally, I think if we want to change in our society, want to change in our country, we need to vote for what we want to see in our society. So if we sit back and say, oh, I think that we need to do this, this, and this, if we don't vote on those policies and for those politicians, then it won't get done. So That's what I think.
Would you like to also weigh in here? Why is voting important for you personally and your community?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and touch base on that. Voting is important to me and my community because, you know, it is my civic duty. Um, I would say that voting provides a quality of life not only for yourself, but as well as future generations. Also, voting allows you to it allows you to make sure that you're voting for elected officials or, you know, people who are in positions of power, meaning that you know, this gives you an opportunity to use your voice as well as making sure that you're holding elected officials accountable as well. So yeah, the reason why I vote because, you know, my life definitely depends on it as well as everyone else's, and that's one of the reasons why I'm very adamant about voting. Considering that I am working on a presidential campaign currently at this moment, so those are the reasons why I choose to vote.
Lexi, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I know personally for me at least, I'm so sorry. Personally for me, as I was growing up, I know that I don't even know if my parents voted when I was growing up. It just wasn't something that was very talked about in my house. But I knew I graduated young, so I came to college before I was able to able to vote. And I started learning, you know, how important voting is not only to me but to my community as a woman, as a Latina. It's all important to each community as its own. And so I definitely always get really excited to vote. Last year was my first year voting, and I was so excited. So personally, I get excited to vote more so because I know from experience that generations before us weren't as kind of fired up as I think our generation is. So I think it's very important for our generation, especially, to go out and vote just because we can we can make a difference as a generation if we all come together and do this one small thing that can change a lot of things for us.
Thank you. And Lexa, would you like to weigh in?
Yes, of course. So I think voting is important for me personally for kind of the same reasons that everybody else said. One, it is your civic duty. Two, it gives you a voice. Three, unfortunately, your everyday citizen is not the most likely person to be representing you in federal government. So being able to have the opportunity to choose who is representing me, I think is incredibly important. And I think that it's important for my community. I am biracially Black, so I kind of have two communities. And particularly for the Black community, I think it's important because there, in history, has been such a lack of representation and so much oppression that it has not gotten to the point where it needs to be, but come far enough where we now have a say and ability to push it further to the point where it needs it to be. And I think we so deeply need to use that privilege that our ancestors and other people fought for and also didn't have. So that makes it more important for me and more important for the community, especially as a woman too, as a woman too, sorry. So many people have sacrificed and fought for me to be able to have this right. And I don't want to take that for granted or throw it away. And I think that it is so, so important to have representation and people who look like me, people who are thinking about people who look like me, and people with similar experiences and backgrounds and in politics. That is incredibly important, I think, for every community. Because I think, like David said, our lives are at stake, or at least our way of life is at stake. And so I think that's very important to consider.
Now we're moving into the next question here, which is how can we address the lack of education just in general about the governmental process in the United States? And I think a good way to do it, again, to kind of mix it up so everyone has a chance to go first, is David, are you interested? Are you willing to jump in there and start us off?
Yeah, I can go ahead and touch bases in reference to that. Um, I think what we need to start addressing as far as the lack of education when it comes to government, I think, as when we're younger, I feel like we're only taught about government on a surface level, and I feel like there needs to be some um, in-depth curriculum in terms of making sure that we know much more history about how government works. I think that, like, for example, in terms of voting, a lot of people don't necessarily know how to vote, or they don't know how to even get registered to vote because we're not taught these things at an early age. And um, I think that there needs to be some more in-depth curriculum so that people are aware that um, that these like, for example, so that people are aware of, like, making sure they know how to vote. For instances, so just basically, there needs to be some more in-depth training and curriculum in reference to that. So I would just say, you know, just enhancing our development when it comes to um, education, I would say.
Great, thank you. Lexi, would you like to weigh in on how we can address the lack of education in the governmental process in the United States?
Yeah, biggest problem with education as far as voting in governmental processes right now is the mobilization of people, and not having the means of getting that education and knowing what to do. I've always heard, even for voting day, things like that, one of the biggest problems is mobilization of voters. But as far as education goes, this time it's mobilization of education. The education is not getting to the communities that it needs to get to. Therefore, I think that a lot of people that are more than capable of voting and would vote are not able to because they're not educated on the candidates or the process of how that works or anything like that. And I think that's one of our biggest problems today and why people don't vote.
Lexa, would you like to speak to that as well?
Yeah, I think Lexi makes a really, really great point, and that is definitely something that needs to be talked about, considered, and worked toward changing. That a lot of the communities that do struggle possibly with voter turnout are the same communities that weren't necessarily educated as much on the governmental affairs. And I do think that correlation is really important to consider. I also think that the education that we have now, kind of like what David said, is very watered down and very simplified. I don't think it really catches people's attention. I mean, it's kind of a running joke that you fell asleep in government class senior year. So I think that incorporating history of all different communities in governmental education is also important, and talking about more than just the founding fathers, the 45 presidents, and what's happening now. There's a lot of things in between there with Black people, with Latino people, with LGBTQ plus people, with women, and the suffragette movement. And I think that, at least personally, part of the reason why I connect to this field in my career and what I do so much is because I am so inspired by, connected to, and interested in the people like me that came before. And I feel like that is kind of a human nature thing where a lot more people would say, wow, these women put their lives on the line so that way women have a voice. That means a lot to me. I want to learn more about this. And I also think that that would make some communities that are often oppressed, aren't maybe educated, or education isn't as accessible to them as others, also feel more connected to the country. Because I do think that our education system and our education processes have the ability to alienate people really easily. So I think that that is also a big part of voter turnout and the lack of education.
Great, thank you, thank you. Okay, so I think we are at Kira. Would you like to weigh in on that? On the question again is how can we address lack of education in the governmental process of the U.S.?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what all the other panelists said. I think there definitely needs to be changes in the education system, whether it be in college or in high school, when we discuss like how to vote, how the process goes, and other government processes. I think, as I think David said, there's kind of a surface level or when discussing government and all that in U.S. history and all of that. So I think if we kind of go in depth and kind of tell people how the process works, how to vote, what's actually on the ballot, because a lot of people are confused on that. So it's a lot of different things that can definitely be changed when discussing stuff like that. So.
Great, thank you. How can the University of Toledo implement programs to educate other majors, about this, about the governmental process? Do you think, Lexi? Do you want to begin with this question?
Yeah, as far as the university goes, I think one of the most important things is, I know we had talked about it in the education question, but a lot of times in high school, a lot of people aren't learning as much about government. I know that I didn't know very much until I got to college. So I definitely personally would hope that someday there is a core requirement of a government, like specifically about governmental processes and how to vote, where to vote, things like that, kind of like the basis of what voting entails. Um, just because, like I said, in government, or I took your American national government in high school, so I was lucky, but and not everyone gets that opportunity, and especially in lower voter turnout communities, not everyone gets that opportunity. So I think that like a core requirement class as far as that goes, because especially since sometimes when people get into college, a lot of them are first time voters. And so I think that's very important also to recognize that a lot of times freshmen in college are first time voters and we have no idea what to do when we vote for the first time. I think it's really important that the university would implement something of that sort for first time voters.
Okay, thank you. Lexa, would you like to go next on that?
So I first really want to touch upon Lexi talking about first-time voters, because I too was a first-time voter coming into college. My first election was the 2018 election. And being a political science major, it was harped on constantly, like vote, 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 vote. And I feel like in other majors, it's not as much. I also feel like for first-time voters, second-time voters, for any-time voters, college is also the situation where you're more often than not away from home. And I don't think that people always understand the absentee ballot system or the mail-in system. And I have noticed that on campus, my freshman year, there were people walking around with clipboards for you to sign up to be registered. And I think that's a great idea. But even further than registered, maybe a good idea that all universities could implement would be kind of, I don't know if it would be a fair, I don't know if it would be a seminar or something to instruct on absentee and mail-in, because I don't think that a lot of college students understand that, because even if they voted before, it was most likely in person, or the voting process that they do understand is the traditional in person, because that's what they see their parents doing. So I think that that would be a really good step. And I also agree with Lexi that it should be a core requirement, just like English, just like math, just like science, because it is kind of like we've talked about before, it does determine life. It determines the way of life. It determines the future. It incorporates the past. And I think instructing people why the things are the way they are, as well as how to manage dealing with things the way they are, would be beneficial, because I think that that would maybe alleviate some of the conflict with things like the Electoral College and voter turnout and voter suppression, if there was an understanding of how it got to the way that it is, versus just, I don't agree with this, I don't like this, so I'm not participating.
Thank you. Kira, would you like to weigh in on this question of how can the University of Toledo implement programs to educate students about the governmental process?
Yeah, so as you stated in my introduction, I'm actually in a program called Campus Vote Project. And one of our missions is to increase voter turnouts on campus. So we've been trying to register people to vote and trying to do informationals and certain posting flyers around campus just to get the word out there when the deadlines are and when to exactly vote and things like that, how to vote, info on absentee ballots and all of that. I agree with what Alexa said that oftentimes in our major, like we know like when to vote and how to vote because it's brought up so many times in our classes as political science majors. But I think in other colleges it's not brought up as much and students don't really acknowledge the fact that it's important. So I think that as a campus, maybe if we do implement other classes, like Alexis said, just as like even if it's a small little like hour, like informational that's required from the professors to tell their students, just to get just so they have the information. I think it's important to kind of spread the word and kind of get them out there to vote.
Great, thank you. David, would you like to weigh in on what the university can do?
Yeah, I think Alexa brought up a good point about having resource fairs. I think that's something that would be very beneficial for the university, in terms of of just informing people on how to be civically involved. Um, I think that, having voter registration tables, having somebody from a local county party chair coming to the university to talk about these voting or these issues, or just answering all the questions that anybody may need in terms of the absentee ballot applications. I think that's the best way to reach college students, is through resource fairs. Generally because that's a great way to get them engaged in terms of that. So that's just those are just some resource fairs to me have always been effective, considering that I've been a college student myself, and they've always worked in terms of just educating students on what they need to do in terms of voting, I would say.
Thank you so much. Moving into a new question that, since everyone has gone through the last one, I believe, I think we're back up at the top now with Lexa again. How can we get students of color and other citizens and non-citizens politically and civically engaged?
I think that something that is lacking in communities of color and why communities of color may not be as politically or civically engaged is one, the lack of representation currently, and two, I think the lack of inclusion in the discussion of history and in the discussion of government affairs. I think that a huge part of the lower voter turnout, especially in Black communities, is part of the lack of belief in the system when the system has so continually oppressed and done wrong by the people that are voting for the system. So I think in order to get these citizens and non-citizens politically and civically engaged, they have to be included in the conversation, and not included in the conversation in the sense that three white old men on a debate stage talk about race, but included in the conversation in the sense that we were a part of building this country. We were a part of fighting for our rights and everybody's rights. We have been suppressed before voting wise. We have been oppressed before in every definition of the word. And you're still expecting us to vote for somebody or something that hasn't proven to make our lives better. So I think the inclusion of these struggles and these contributions and these important capabilities are a huge part of inspiring a higher voter turnout. Specifically, I can speak a little bit more on the Black community because I'm a part of it. I don't want to speak for all races or ethnicities, but I think that as a university, it would be important to just make professors aware of that. And when things are discussed historically, or when government affairs are discussed, make sure that the curriculum encompasses everything and that it isn't whitewashed or watered down. And I think things like the Black Student Union should be included in events that inspire voter registration and events that teach about absentee ballots in classes or campus things happening that would support civic and political engagement. So that way you're not just hearing, go out and vote, your life depends on it, go out and vote, but you're being included in the process of what it means to go out and vote, if that makes any sense to anyone.
Yes, very much so. Thank you. Okay, Lexi, would you like to weigh in on this question of how can we get students of color and other citizens and non-citizens politically and civically engaged?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, and I go back to my mobilization point, and this isn't just students, this is community-wide, because as statistics show, a lot of communities that have lower voter turnout are usually communities of color that are low income as well, a lot of the times. I think that has a lot to do with that. And also as students in high school and things like that as well. Like I said, for me, if you don't see your parents like going out and voting and, you know, being civically engaged, it's hard to do it yourself just because you don't even know where to start. I mean, government processes are so difficult and so complex that it's something that you can't just learn in a day by someone saying, go vote. So when people come to college, I think a lot of people are confused and a little bit overwhelmed. I mean, I know I was very overwhelmed the first time I was able to vote just because I really had no idea. And then also, I think that as far as like campus organizations and things like that, there needs to be, especially in election years, even smaller elections, there needs to be more discussion within these communities about why it's important for these communities specifically to vote. My current research is on students in school and voter turnout of students of color. And statistics say that students, specifically students of color, do not go out and vote. And I think that we need, first and foremost, to get to the root of that problem and why they're not voting. And then try to fix that problem starting at the root of it. And something I was always told, and that's even with voting, with anything, this is kind of like a random answer, but a lot of times, especially college students, something needs to be fun. I think we need to find a way to make voting fun for college students, because students specifically do not want to do things that are not fun or that they feel have no direct impact on them. And voting, a lot of times people think that it has no direct impact on them. And I think educating about the fact that it will have a direct impact on you will not only push them to be more engaged, but also make them want to be more engaged in that sense as well.
David, would you like to weigh in on how can we get students of color and other citizens and non-citizens politically and civically engaged?
Yeah, just to touch bases on what everyone else on the panel has said, it starts with, you know, making sure that we're a part of the conversation. As one of our panelists has mentioned, it's important to have representation, you know, people that actually, you know, look like us. That plays a role with just making sure that, you know, people are being civically engaged. I also think that, you know, people of color, they aren't civically engaged because they're just uninformed of, you know, of how to, you know, actually stay engaged, or, you know, they're just not being properly, you know, taught. So I think, you know, that that comes back to, you know, just making sure that, you know, we're just making sure that, you know, we're being welcomed as a part of the conversation when it comes to, you know, oppression and things like that. So I think pretty much what everyone said, you know, was spot on.
Thank you. Kira, would you like to weigh in as well?
Yes, definitely. I agree definitely with what everyone has said. I think that inclusion is definitely an issue when discussing why students of color don't actually go out and vote or aren't civically engaged. I think what Alexa said was that oftentimes we're left out of the conversation, and even in political offices, we don't necessarily see people who look like us and who have the same experience as us. So it's oftentimes to connect with those politicians, and oftentimes it's hard for us to actually go out and vote for them and to do research on them because we're just thinking, oh, like they aren't going to do what's best for us. But I think that it's important to have people out there who do, and I think also someone else said is having us involved, especially on campus, having us included in certain conversations where we're able to say our side and have people actually take that into account when making decisions. So yeah, I definitely agree with what everyone said.
Okay, great. So now we're into a new question here, I believe. And I think, Kira, we're at you now, going at the top of the response. What makes a ballot valid, do you think? This is perhaps, I don't know, a little bit philosophical or theoretical or whatever, but what do you think?
Do you mean as far as like what makes it valid, like in the process, like the election process, or just as
Yeah, that's a good question because so the question was provided to me in that way, but I would invite you. I think what this is getting at is really the question of political legitimacy, right? Because you could have someone who is, you know, elected perhaps through a kind of narrow interpretation of rules, but lacks political legitimacy. For example, you could have one candidate win a popular vote, you could have another candidate win an electoral vote, and then that's contested, right, in terms of the question of legitimacy. Or you could interpret this question in any way you like, right? What is it that, because clearly when you cast a ballot, that is, it's a process of counting, right? And that's a very kind of quantitative question, but then there's also a very kind of political meaning in that as well.
Right. Yeah, so I think this is definitely an interesting question because I think when explaining this to other people and explaining to them why the ballot's valid, why their vote is valid when voting during the election, I think it's hard to kind of explain. But I think I guess I could say that like when we actually do go out and vote and we look at the politicians and the issues that are on there, it's important to note the fact that these are things that are going to determine our future. So when we vote for these issues, and we should really do our research on it and kind of where was I going with this? Do our research on the issues and kind of know exactly who we're voting for. So I think as far as what I was kind of getting at the beginning, as far as how they're counted and as far as electoral college and how that all goes, I think it just goes with like education and educating ourselves on how the process actually works. So I don't know if anyone else wants to involve on this. I'm just trying to like navigate the question and everything.
Yeah, for sure. David, would you like to weigh in at all?
Yeah, I was gonna say in terms of what makes a ballot valid, I know that right now we're in the stages of, where people are early voting and they're, we're telling people that, they need to return their absentee ballots as soon as possible. Just because in terms of there's been a slight delay with USPS. And I would say that, when you're, filling out your ballot, whether if it be by mail, or if you're going to do it by mail, then you need to make sure that the envelope is actually signed correctly. Also, you need to make sure that not only is it signed correctly, but filled out with the correct address, your first and last name. I know some people may choose to go to the polls to vote, and they might not necessarily know their polling location, they can also go to iwillvote.com. It would tell them everything they need to know in reference to their polling location. All you do is have to enter your city and state and zip code, and it'll pull up their polling location, depending on what state. I know, like, Toledo is in Ohio, so they could just type in Toledo, Ohio, and then their polling location will come up. But yeah, I think what make a ballot valid is just making sure that the ballot is being filled out accurately, because ultimately that's what's gonna make the ballot count. Because if it's not filled out accurately, then it would be invalid. So that's what I have for that.
Great, thank you so much. Lexi, would you like to weigh in on this?
Yeah, so I'd like to start off with a little disclaimer for any voters that aren't sure. If you cast a ballot, as long as it is filled out correctly, if you're doing it by mail, or if you go to the polling locations, your ballot is sent in, which in my eyes makes that valid. Now, in the sense of the popular vote and the electoral vote, I think it's hard to differentiate, kind of, not differentiate, but like, I'm trying to think of the word I'm trying to use. It's hard to see that your ballot is valid, especially when a candidate, like this last election, wins the popular vote but does not win the electoral vote, especially for people who don't quite understand how the Electoral College works. I think that this question is kind of hard because you want to make every voter feel like their ballot is valid, which in a sense it is. But I think the hardest part about even thinking about that question is when people especially see that the popular vote has won, but the Electoral College has not. And I think that comes with education and knowledge about how the Electoral College works and how you can make your ballot make your ballot count, I guess, in a sense. I think it's hard to say even, this question it's kind of, it's a hard question to answer just because like I said, like you want to think that every ballot is valid. And like I said, in a sense it is, but it's also hard because sometimes, things happen, the Electoral College happens, boo Electoral College. And yeah, I'm having a hard time kind of thinking on how to like explain what I'm trying to say, but in a nutshell, that's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Lexa, would you like to weigh in on the question?
Yeah, I agree that it is a difficult question, especially when there are so many people who naturally feel like their ballots don't count. So I completely understand what you're saying, Lexi. Like, it's hard to explain, especially when the popular vote wins and the Electoral College doesn't, because your natural and immediate argument is, well, my vote obviously didn't count because here we are. But I do think that the what makes a ballot invalid at this point, if I could maybe answer that question instead, is the lack of trust in the system and the lack of consistency in the system. It's less a individual citizen's mistake, and more of the fact that I think, like you said at the beginning, Dr. Broxmeyer, we are kind of truly in a battle for our democracy in a lot of ways. And I think that does affect the validity of votes cast. And in theory, and in an ideal world, every single ballot that is cast is valid. And the only thing that would make a ballot invalid is not voting. But unfortunately, we do not live in an ideal world. So I think that there's a lot of intricacies that make a ballot invalid. And I think a lot of them are philosophical, and I think a lot of them are situational. And I unfortunately think a lot of them are out of the citizens' control. And again, like Lexi said, as long as you cast your vote in the correct way and follow the instructions, then you did your job, and your ballot is valid. That's like a tongue twister. Ballot. Like, I can't get it out right. As long as you cast your vote following the technical instructions, then you have done your job to make your ballot valid. Our next step as a country and as citizens is to make the system valid. And I don't think that that necessarily means that we have to abolish the electoral college, like people say. I don't know necessarily what that looks like. That's a conversation that needs to continue to be had. But I think that right now, with how anxiety inducing and stressful and scary the current process is, and how our system is not trustworthy at the moment, all you can really focus on is your individual technicalities. And as long as you know what those are, you are doing the right thing and your vote is valid. I'm sorry if that's super pessimistic. Also, I'm not going to be pessimistic at all. I think that this is a huge election, and it's hopefully going to bring a lot of much needed change. And from what I've researched and seen, we already have a much higher voter turnout than we did in 2016, which is absolutely amazing. So I'm not pessimistic. I'm actually pretty optimistic, but that is kind of how I see and how I interpreted that question.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. That's I think optimism and pessimism are both welcome here. I think. So we do have one more question before we get into the Q&A, and I know we've got a bunch of questions from the audience that are coming in here. My thinking here is I want to give everyone on the panel an opportunity to consider the last question, but just so that we can respect the time of the people in the audience as well, so that they can get their questions in. Maybe just try and be short and sweet with your response to this last question. And we'll go. We'll start with David, if you're interested here. Why is it important to understand local government and local politics? Not just necessarily the thing that's right in front of our face all the time, right? The national politics and the presidential election, but local politics as well.
Yeah, one of the reasons why it's important to understand local politics is because the politics that are in your city that you currently reside in, they make decisions on your behalf for your communities. That's why it's important to stay civically engaged with locally, because there are decisions that are being made with your life, right in your own community. So that's the reason why I would prefer to stay civically engaged in reference to that.
Lexi, would you like to weigh in on the question of what's important about local government, local politics?
Yeah. So I think local and city, all of those politics definitely are where everything starts nationally. So I think it's very important I don't think it's very easy to just immediately dive into trying to understand national politics. I think the most important part is starting with your local government, to understand that, and then with that knowledge, you're able to understand national politics better. And maybe that will help with some civic engagement as well. When you're voting locally and you're seeing direct impacts of your local governments and you're seeing the changes in your communities, it helps people stay civically engaged nationally because they've already seen the impacts of their vote locally.
Lexa, would you like to add local politics?
I completely agree with Lexi. I also think that, kind of going off of what she said, representation starts locally. So if you want representation regionally or nationally, you have to start by voting locally, and that's really important. And I think understanding the different branches, I interned for the NAACP this summer. And so throughout that internship, I got a much greater understanding of the legislative branch. And I think understanding what each individual branch does is equally as important as understanding local politics, because that is the foundation of our government. That is the foundation of national, local, regional politics, and that is how things get done. And I think when you're voting and you're picking who is stronger and you're evaluating a candidate's strengths and weaknesses, you kind of have to know the processes that they personally are going to be involved in order to evaluate that correctly.
Thank you so much. Kira, local politics, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think people tend to forget that local politics, I think they just kind of brush over it. But I think that it's important to note the fact that these these local politicians are what make the decisions that happen in your community. This is like they make the policies that directly. So I think that it's important to actually do the research on who you're voting for the election. I know certain people that I know just kind of click randomly after they pick the president, and that's just that. And that's not that's not the way to go. But I think definitely just informing yourself on what's going on in your community is definitely important because, as everyone else said, this is the first step into the national level. So definitely pay attention to that is very important.
Yeah, thank you all on that. I would just add, as the political scientist here who also teaches an urban politics class, there's just insanely low voter turnout in local elections, especially the spring elections, the off-cycle elections. I mean, in a primary election, we're talking about 7%, 5, 6, 7% voter turnout. In a general election, in an off-cycle, maybe 14 to 20 something percent voter turnout. The amount of impact you can have locally is just, if you get a group of people who are really engaged, really energized on an issue, you're gonna press local officials to be held accountable on something, right? You can do that in local politics. Just to make that pitch. And also, I was checking on the ballot before this event, what was going to be on the ballot in Lucas County, which you can do if you go to the Lucas County Board of Elections website. And there are a bunch of offices that are on the ballot that are really significant for how you view public safety and how you view justice and social justice when it comes to law enforcement, for instance. So there's the prosecuting attorney. That's a local office that's on the ballot in Toledo. There is the sheriff, the county sheriff. That's a powerful elected position, right? There are 3 candidates that are on the ballot for that. Then there are all of these state Supreme Court races, and there's local courts as well. I mean, these are people's lives, right, who are in this system, and you can hold these local officials accountable at the ballot box, depending on the positions that they're taking. Let's move now to question and answer, because the people in the audience have been very, very patient, and I thank them for that. The first question that we have from the audience here is, what frustrates students the most? Or let's say, what frustrates students and community members the most about the current political climate? And let me perhaps throw it open to people in the panel. And if there's someone who would like to speak first, maybe just raise your hand and we can, have you go first. Lexa, would you like to jump in there?
I think that the biggest thing about the current political climate isn't the fact that people disagree. And I think that that is a common misconception in a lot, like on my social media, in my conversations with people, it's always the issue is that people just can't see the other perspective. And I don't think that that's true at all, at least in my personal experience. I think that the biggest issue with the current political climate is, one, how strictly party affiliated opinions have to be. Like, to be Republican, you have to have these beliefs. To be a Democrat, you have to have these beliefs. And I think that that is incredibly destructive. I do think that parties are important and platforms for parties are important, but as citizens, I do think it's important to not identify morally with the specific party, because things change, people change, experiences happen, and that creates division. So number one, I think that is a big issue. And two, kind of going along with that, everything is very, very extreme. And I think that I'm 20 years old, so I haven't been on this earth for an incredibly long time. But growing up and experiencing what I have of the different elections, I think that that is unique to this election. It is always Republican versus Democrat. It's always platform versus platform. And obviously, the two parties disagree on platforms, or else we wouldn't have two parties. But I don't think I've ever experienced an election or two candidates that are so separated, and two parties that are so separated, and two fan bases, for lack of better words, that are so separated. There seems to be absolutely no middle ground in leadership, no middle ground in policymaking, no compromise anywhere. And I think that a lot of it is because we're talking about, again, people's lives and morality. So there isn't often compromise when it comes to morality. There's compromise when it comes to pizza toppings. And I do think that's important to consider. But at the same time, with a lot of the things that are tearing everybody apart, I do believe that there is a way to make the country better step by step. And to do that, you have to find some sort of middle ground. And I don't feel like our politicians are doing that. And I think that trickles down into the communities where, because leaders and politicians aren't doing that and aren't having those conversations, citizens aren't doing that and aren't having those conversations. And for me, that's very frustrating because it doesn't necessarily allow there to be a lot of progress. It just ends up being tedious, exhausting, emotionally, physically, and then of course people check out, and of course people become unengaged or disengaged. I don't know what the right word is.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Before we see if anyone else wants to speak to that question, I just want to remind everyone, if they have a question, they can put it in the chat as well. Would anyone else like to speak to what frustrates students or community members about the current political moment? Lexi.
I think the thing that frustrates me the most with this election is the inability to discuss it. Because going along with Lex's point and how separated not only our community and our party system is, but how separated our nation is at the moment, it's almost like you can't discuss it. They always say, like, don't discuss religion and politics. But I think that has taken on a whole new meaning with this upcoming election. It is very difficult to discuss anything that regards the election, even, questions or anything like that, because things are getting so twisted with the, I don't want to say like the aggressiveness, but like, I feel like this election has been very aggressive from both sides. And I think it's hard to have and I think that's most of the reason that a lot of people aren't having these discussions about this specific election, for fear of just kind of being shut down or not being able to discuss it. And I think that's been the most frustrating thing for me, is feeling like I can't talk to anybody about the election, even if I have questions or I want to discuss like one specific point, because you don't want anyone to kind of like come at you or anything like that. And I think that's been the most frustrating part as a student for me.
Would anyone else like to weigh in on that? Please.
Yeah, so I think, as everyone else said, there's this big divide, and has been probably the past 4 years. I think that it's hard for us to communicate with each other when there's always this level of disrespect, or everyone wants to argue, and it's hard to share your opinion. I think a lot of people feel that way, so they just don't, and they don't share their opinion, which is kind of troublesome, because their opinion could be beneficial to changing policies and all of that. And it's definitely difficult for me, especially, to discuss this, and you don't even want to, because you're afraid of the backlash, and that could be bad. And especially with different political movements that have been going on now, I think that just the backlash that they've been getting, I think that's not necessarily how we should go about things. I think that if we all discuss, well, in the perfect world, we would discuss it, but obviously that's not necessarily the case, and that could be definitely damaging in our society. So.
Thank you. Thanks. Anything else on that question, frustrations? I think that would probably be one we could go on forever about, I suppose. But let's go to the next question from the audience, which is, would any of the panelists ever consider running for office, and why or why not? Anyone willing to speak to that at all? I think this one is from Dr. McKether in the chat. I don't know if you guys saw it.
Nobody else wants to. but if somebody else wants to, go ahead. But if I'm the only one, I always say no, because I think politics, as much as I love learning about political science, I think politics are tedious, and I think politics are exhausting, and it involves so much of your personal being, your personal life, that I feel scared to put myself kind of in the ring of wolves, if you will. I always say no, but I am very opinionated. And as I'm sure everyone can tell, I love to talk. I love to discuss things. And I have an extreme passion. And so I always say no, but I think that if I were established in my legal career and able to, for lack of better words, get that out of my system and the opportunity presented itself, it would be hard for me to turn down, just because I want to be a part of the change. But there is that conflicting back and forth with yourself where it's like, how much changing could I do when there's so much more to being a politician than just policy? There's so much more to being a politician than just speeches and getting your voice heard and being a part of things. It's an entire identity almost. It's not just a career. So I do think that it's very conflicting, and the short answer is no. But if you ever see me running for office anywhere, mind your own business. Well, don't vote for me, but you know what I mean.
Anybody else
Yeah,
on
I
this
can
question?
touch.
Please.
Yeah. So I think that this is the question that I've always battled with, because I've always been involved with like community things even since I was in college. I've like been involved with the community, but I've also, found myself wanting to run for office in some capacity, eventually, in the future. Um, because I always thought that I would just be more of a community leader. But, I realized that even when you're working in a community, like, you need policy and legislation to get things done. And however, um, I think that, that's one of the reasons why I have pursued an interest in politics. It's because you need that policy and legislation to get bills passed, or to get change done in your community. So yeah, I think running for office is something that I might consider one day. I'm just not sure in what capacity yet, but I would probably want to start at the local level first, I would say.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Anybody else want to weigh in? Um, Otherwise, I would say the questions have pretty much run out from the audience. I certainly would use my prerogative as the moderator to put one up here. I mean, I know everyone has been very generous with their time and already, so I don't want to keep everyone if the questions have run out. But I'd be curious to hear what you think the most pressing issue is facing this generation, right? Because obviously there are a lot of things that you might think about that would be important. But if you were going to prioritize the things that you think should be placed first, right? Because we're limited somewhat in, timing and the our ability to mobilize, say, or whatever, right? What is it that you think would be the most important thing that the country or the state or your community should prioritize?
Um, I I was gonna speak again. I was gonna say something that everyone should prioritize is I would say COVID-19. It's I think that we definitely have to take it serious because many people have passed away from this deadly pandemic. It's even changed the way we do our jobs. We can't really do a lot of in-person interaction right now, even for the kids, for people who are in school, or whether if you're in college, or even at the younger grade levels, they've had to adapt to doing everything virtually. So I think that, that COVID-19 is really one of the pressing issues at this time. Just because, we have to be able to do things safely. So I would say that's one of the pressing issues at this time.
Anybody else want to weigh in? No one is obliged to, but just to put it on the table. Yeah, Alexa.
I think that that's a really, really great question, and really, really something that everybody should be thinking about, especially those who do want to run for office or those who are going into legal careers or political careers. And I think that the easy, cliche, and short answer that everybody always says is social media. But I do think that's many benefits. It's hard to like solely blame that as something that has affected things negatively. And this may be taken the wrong way, and I would never mean it to, but I think that the main problem that my generation faces is entitlement. And I think you see that in the COVID-19 pandemic with people not taking it seriously. I think you see that with the race issues, where there's kind of a lack of empathy and a lack of perspective gaining. I think you see that in the production-based society that we have, where everybody's focused on them getting as much as they possibly can and not on the well-being or health of their neighbor. And I think that that is slowly changing and can change, but I feel like that one thing, and I don't want to say selfishness, because I do think that they're two different things. I do think that the idea of entitlement kind of encompasses all of the different things that you talk about daily, like race, COVID-19, voting turnout, like if it's a welfare, taxing, big government versus small government, public versus private administration, like all of these massive discussions kind of all trickle back to the fact that everybody is kind of out for themselves. It's a little bit of every man is for themselves right now. And I think that that makes those discussions and solving those issues much more difficult.
Anybody else interested in weighing in? Okay. Thank you. This has been such an amazing conversation. I feel like I learned a lot, and I'm grateful for that. And I think I speak on behalf of the audience members too. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Everyone is super busy, work, school, and everything like that. And I'm going to turn it over to Amir again. I think Amir is going to have a thing to say before the panel closes. But I just want to say thank you for your generosity. And I look forward to this next generation, because I'm ready to pass over the mantle. You guys, please lead us into the future.
Great job, Dr. Broxmeyer. Thank you so much for your time, your effort. You did an amazing job moderating tonight, and I really do appreciate it. To the panelists, I know it's been a rough time, so I really do appreciate your time, whether it's school, civic unrest, everything else going on in the world. So we really do appreciate your time at the Office of Diversity and Inclusion Office. As we go on, I want to say good night to everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. But thank you so much, and we're going to close out.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you.